After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." And they said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the beach. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, have you any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in, for the quantity of fish was so great. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his clothes, for he was stripped for work, and sprang into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far off from the land, but 100 yards off. When they got on land, they saw a charcoal fire there, with fish lying on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" For they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." Jesus said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him a third time, "Do you love me?" And Peter said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you girded yourself and walked where you would. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you to where you do not wish to go." He said this to show by what death he was to glorify God. And after this, Jesus said to him, "Follow me." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. Let us pray. Good Lord, as you teach us to go and tend and feed your sheep, we need your help. Guide us in our ways of life. Guide us in how we use our time. And guide us in the words and the actions we choose, that we can indeed tend your sheep as you see fit. And so may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. Amen. One topic that I often reflect on, especially as it pertains to my own vocation and my greatest values in life, is the well-being of the church. It is a common observation in Western life that church activity and participation has waned in the last 50 years, and that church is now peripheral to many spheres of which it was once central. It is ironic, in my view, that even as developments in philosophy and science and sociology have increasingly confirmed the plausibility and necessity of religious narratives and participation, the church has seen a steady decline in influence. And while the good majority of Americans identify as Christian and hold general Christian beliefs, the position of church teaching in individual, communal, and national life has waned over the decades. There is not a single cause for this. Many factors are at play, including the rise of skepticism and philosophical materialism, of challenges integrating the biblical worldview with scientific insights, the sudden interfacing with competing religious worldviews, and critiques from Marxism, Freudianism, feminism, and others, and the general Western breakdown of respect for institutional authority. There are many factors, and others not listed here, but the one I would like to reflect on today is a surprising one, and one that affects us all, or most of us. I should say by way of introduction that this is my own interpretation of the facts and of reality available to me, and it is skewed by my professional experience. And I no way intend to judge anybody. And even as I know you all, I don't really know your personal lives or the intentions of your hearts. And this is not meant at all a condemnation, but rather as a general observation and hopefully a helpful critique that may help us to find a deeper understanding of challenges facing our life as a church today. With that said, the greatest object challenging Christianity today is television. And I can perhaps feel many of you say, "Oh, come on, Vicar. You've jumped the shark again." But before filing this away as a message from the 50s or 60s, I'd like you to consider television. We all know what television is and what television does, as 99% of households have one. But how could something so commonplace and benign as television be a challenge to Christian life? There are two reasons, and you may be able to guess at them. The first is the amount of time that television occupies in the average day. Currently, according to Nielsen data, the average American watches 4.2 hours of television each day. That's the average American. And that increases as people age. Those in their mid-60s and above watch over 7 hours per day, which is just over 50 hours per week. The average retiree works overtime watching television. And while many people have the TV on while doing other productive things in life, the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that the average person watches TV as their primary activity for just about 3 hours per day, compared to work, which occupies just over 3.25 hours per day. Now, this activity, watching television, is relatively harmless in itself. Yet its effect on our church and our spiritual life can be measured in the amount of time it displaces from other potentially productive activity. It constitutes by far the greatest leisure activity of modern people. And we do have a great amount of leisure in our lives. As comparison, in the 19th century, the average worker checked in for about 70 hours per week. This has declined steeply in the 20th century, so that today the average American worker is employed for on average 33 hours per week, or just under half. The amount of time housework and errands and caring for others also has dropped sharply to about 4 hours per day, as time-saving devices and shrinking family size has freed up time. In short, even as we feel busy, and many of us do feel overwhelmed, we have vastly more leisure time than in previous generations. And yet, while the amount of leisure time has increased substantially in our lives, we have gradually withdrawn from civic life, from charitable events, from public activities, and from church participation. There is significantly more time available in people's lives, and it largely goes towards watching television. Now, people can't be wholly blamed for this, and it's not a moral failing to be drawn to television, because that is precisely what television is designed to do. It is meant to draw your attention. And I say this as someone who formerly worked in entertainment. Very creative minds, enterprising and ambitious individuals, and hundreds of billions of dollars are spent each year in creating something that will capture your attention. And television does this by hyperstimulating the nervous system. It does this just as drugs or gambling or pornography or video games synthetically stimulate our natural sensory and reward systems. In the natural world, we respond to stimuli to varying degrees depending on the benefit and the danger of surrounding events. And television deliberately co-opts our responses and synthetically stimulates to capture our attention. Now, let me demonstrate how this works. A few ways in which it works. Naturally, we are alerted by fast-moving things, by visual changes, by loud sounds, by bright lights. And television production utilizes each of these to the greatest degree it can without overstimulating. Television storyboards are based on cuts or sudden changes in perspective which stimulate. If you've ever watched a recording of a single frame of a single shot for 2 hours, it's remarkably dull and ordinary. The cut, or the change in perspective, stimulates. Similarly, our attention naturally goes towards the attractive. Television features the most beautiful, the most charismatic, and attractive people in the country, in the world, and they are carefully selected and competitively so. And chosen actors are prepared extensively by classes, coaches, stylists, managers, trainers, and dietitians. And even then, the result that is filmed is edited to remove blemishes with lighting, with filters, with multiple takes, and with digital alteration. The most attractive in the world are selected and then refined and synthetically modified, which draws our attention. Stimulation is also generated by the sensationalism in the news, the dramatic narratives of daytime television, the dangerous situations of war shows and nature channels, and by the confrontational, surprising, and sometimes revolting situations of reality TV. These are all carefully prepared. And each show that is aired is vetted among dozens of other projects and then developed as far as it can to this singular end, to capture your attention. And this is done because a lot of money is made. About $200 billion a year in America in television, half through advertising. An acting coach once shrewdly told me, in some of the frankest advice I received as an actor, that I should never forget that my job is not as an artist. My job is selling dish soap. The actor is part of a mechanism to catch people's attention, that they will see commercials and buy dish soap. It's true. And so people are drawn to television for long periods because that is precisely what it is designed to do. The downside is that the hours we spend each day watching is occupied doing that instead of visiting our neighbors, instead of engaging in productive work, instead of improving our property, looking after our family, practicing our spiritual life, and yes, participating in church activities. Television displaces time that may be used for the church and spiritual life, but it also challenges church in a second way. And that is that the values communicated through television are, by and large, antithetical to the Christian message. Television is produced to make you buy things. and it deliberately communicates a materialistic worldview and its values. It emphasizes trips, experiences, pleasure, excitement, products, success, sexuality, drama, things that will sell. The Christian message, in contrast, is about sacrifice. It's about loving your neighbor, about service, about setting one's mind not on material things, but on spiritual things. It is neither self-oriented nor pleasure-oriented, but rather oriented towards God and righteousness. These two worldviews and value sets are in direct conflict with one another. And consequently, when television reflects on church life, it typically does so in a denigrating fashion or it ignores it. Church life has great positive impacts on all measures of well-being, from achievement to life satisfaction, to educational attainment, to family stability, to mental health. It is second as a factor only to good health. And if a product or a service could bottle those effects and sell it, it would be all over the news and marketed energetically. But it can't be done because the Christian message is free. Now, do we need television? My personal opinion is I think not. Our ancestors survived for many generations and were somehow happier, according to surveys, even as they worked longer days, owned less, suffered more, and lived shorter lives. I myself haven't had a television since moving to California 7 years ago, because I didn't care for how it made me feel and because I wanted more time in my life. And personally, I don't feel it has done me a great deal of harm. On the contrary, it frees me to work 10 or 12 or 14 hours each day for the good of the community, which I enjoy. Now, what does this tirade, which I hope is an informative critique, what does it have to do with the gospel? Well, that's illustrated in the gospel passage today. After the resurrection, Jesus appears to his disciples. And one morning, after several of them are out fishing all night, the day breaks and they find Jesus cooking breakfast on the seashore. After their reunion, Jesus asks Peter a question. Peter, do you love me? Peter says, yes. And Jesus says, if you love me, do this. Feed my sheep. He asks him again, Peter, do you love me? Peter says, of course, you know that I love you. Jesus says, go and tend my sheep. He asks him a third time and says this to reinforce, Peter, if you love me, do this. Look after my people. After Jesus' extensive life and teachings about loving God and loving our neighbor, Jesus, in his last words, pins it down to something very concrete, something very real. If you love me, take care of my people. Feed them. Tend them. And the same question is ours today. We are called, if we do love God, to active involvement in tending God's sheep. And that calling cannot be fulfilled if we are passively watching life on a screen. Christ calls us to a rich and vivid life walking with God. And this call has nothing to do with how old we are. For God called David as a boy and Moses and Abraham when they were in their 80s. And it has little to do with being entertained. And it has a great deal to do with helping people courageously in need. When we get to heaven, at the end of our lives, if the scriptures are trustworthy, the sense given is that God will care little about how many games we won, or the number of playoffs we watched, or the series of television shows we got through, or any of the passive experiences we've had. None of that will be counted to us as righteousness. You may ask rather, what did you do? What lives did you change? If you love me, how have you tended my sheep? And if our time, 7 hours per day, is watching television, what will we be entrusted with when we use what we've been given primarily for our pleasure? There are many ways that we can tend Jesus' sheep through the work of the church. Here at First, we are sorely in need of help with visitation. The Food Pantry Board is in need of help and presently is looking for a new president. We are starting this month a new project to refurbish the exterior grounds, to restore things, some things that have been out of commission for a few decades. We need people willing to be involved in assisting with events, in bringing food and inviting people to church, in leading ministries, in organizing youth and VBS programs, in writing cards and visiting the sick, and praying. There are many needs just right here within this church. In many ways, we can all help to tend and feed Jesus' sheep.